We are now about to finish Surviving Hitler, a Boy in the Nazi Death Camps. We did finish chapter 14, and now we are going to look at the final section of the book called The Concentration Camps. There are questions for you to answer. Number 1, how many concentration camps, both work and prisoner of war camps and slave labor killing camps, were there total? Number 2, for Jewish prisoners, all the concentration camps were death camps. The only way a person left them was by dying. What are the 5 ways the prisoners died in the camps? Number 3, when prisoners arrived at a death camp, they all went through the selection process. What was this? Number 4, what did the Nazis do with the prisoners once they realized they would lose the war? Number 5, what percent of Jewish children, Jack being one of them, survived the Holocaust? Number 6, what was the Kindertransport? Number 7, how many people died during World War II? Number 8, how many gypsies were killed? Number 9, how many people were murdered in the concentration camps? And number 10, how many Jews were killed? And finally, number 11, what percentage of the Jewish population of Poland survived? This is the beginning of that section with a quote by Jack's son, John Mandelbaum. There are many lessons one can learn from my father's story, but for me, one of the most important lessons has always been that extraordinary people are simply ordinary people, like my father, who rose to the challenge in an extraordinary crisis. The concentration camps. The Nazis set up a complex system of camps throughout Europe. Some were prisoner of war camps, others were slave labor or killing camps. Some had only a few hundred prisoners, and others had as many as 50,000. There may have been as many as 9,000 concentration camps, many of them smaller satellite camps of larger ones. With the exception of Blechhammer, the first concentration camp Jack was in, all the others he were in were satellite camps of Gross-Rosen concentration camp. All of these were fairly close to one another and were in the vicinity of the city of Breslau, then in eastern Germany, now in western Poland, and named Wrocław. The camps established to intern prisoners were usually built with the cheapest materials possible. Barracks were built of wood or concrete slabs with wooden or concrete floors. Some camps were converted factories or stables. Inside the electrified barbed wire fences and guard stations that surrounded every camp were the barracks, a kitchen, latrines, and a long, bare, open yard where prisoners would line up for roll call. Outside the fence, but usually on the camp grounds, were the guards and officers' quarters, storage facilities, and administration area. Some camps were located in very isolated areas, and some were on the outskirts of communities. The elite SS troops of Hitler's army ran the concentration camps as a profitable business. In addition to the labor that prisoners contributed to the Nazi war effort, the SS leased prisoners to factories and businesses, collecting payment for each of them. How much was paid sometimes depended on the perceived value of the prisoner's labor. According to surviving records, Jack's labor was often worth twice as much as that of the other prisoners. In order to keep track of prisoners, the Nazis had an elaborate bookkeeping system in many camps where they recorded entry dates, health information, work information, the dates of transfers or death. New prisoners were assigned numbers, which were affixed to their uniforms. In some camps, prisoners were tattooed with their numbers, beginning with low numbers and progressing to higher ones. Camp record-keeping systems noted prisoners' numbers and sometimes their names as well. For Jewish prisoners, all the concentration camps were death camps. The only way a person left them was by dying, from overwork, starvation, disease, brutal punishment, or execution. There were also camps where newly arrived transports of people went through a selection process where they were sent to a group on the right or the left, to life or to death. Those given the death sign were taken directly to the gas chambers. At Auschwitz alone, which was part slave labor camp and part killing camp, over 1.25 million people were murdered at the hands of the Nazis. 90% were Jewish. At the killing camps, victims were usually gassed within 24 hours of arrival. Some of the more notorious killing camps were Belzec, Sobibor, Treblinka, Shemlo, Majdanek, and Auschwitz-Birkenau. When the Nazis realized they would lose the war, they did not want survivors telling what happened. Many prisoners were killed. Others were taken on forced marches, which were actually death marches, since few of the freezing, starving prisoners survived them. Today, some of the camps have become museums where visitors can see the barracks, the gas chambers, and the crematoriums. Sober reminders of one of the blackest marks on human history. Girls in the camps. Along with young children, the Nazis killed their mothers and older sisters. Girls and women who were strong and healthy and were not trying to care for a child had the possibility of being placed in labor camps. They worked in factories or on farms and did heavy outdoor work. They were supervised by female guards and capos who could be every bit as brutal as their male counterparts. In some camps, females wore sack-like dresses. In others, they wore the same striped uniforms as males. Like males, they had their heads and bodies shaved and deloused. Camp conditions for females were very similar to what boys and men endured, but far fewer girls and women were able to survive them. Children in the Holocaust. The Nazis viewed children as a liability and showed them no mercy. It is estimated that less than 10% of Europe's Jewish children under the age of 16 survived the Holocaust. The Nazis also targeted Gypsy children and all children with mental or physical disabilities. Many other children starved to death during the war. When the Nazis rounded up families, if they wanted to use the parents of laborers, children were sent to the gas chambers alone, or were shot and buried in mass graves. In some instances, children were allowed to go to the camps with their parents. Some children were even sent to camps by themselves. Older children, provided they were healthy and strong, were put to work. Because conditions in the camp were so bad, most children eventually succumbed to starvation or disease. Nobody knows how many Jewish children went into hiding. Figures range from 10,000 to 100,000. Many of these children were hidden in monasteries and convents, or on remote farms, in secret rooms in houses, or in underground sewers. They were never totally safe. Before the war started, some children were sent to other countries for safety reasons. Under a program called Kindertransport, several thousand German and Austrian Jewish children were sent to Great Britain, the United States, and Palestine, now Israel, before the war started. Most never saw their parents again. The war left many children orphans. Some of these children had seen their families murdered. Many did not know the fate of their families and spent years looking for them. Some children were not orphaned, but because of the war, they lost contact with their families. Regardless of the circumstances, most of these children suffered long-term effects of stress, loss, fear, and trauma. Some went to live with relatives after the war. Others stayed in children's centers established in Europe after the war and grew up there. Once they were teenagers, many moved to Palestine, Great Britain, Australia, Canada, or the United States. The human cost of World War II. An estimated 55 million people died in World War II. Only 17 million were soldiers. The rest were civilians. Approximately 500,000 Gypsies, 1/3 of their population, were murdered by the Nazis. The correct name for these people is Roma or Sinti. Hitler persecuted them because they were a dark-skinned ethnic minority he considered inferior. 11 million people were murdered in the Nazi death camps. Over 6 million of Europeans' 8.6 million Jews were murdered between 1933 and 1945. Of Poland's pre-war Jewish population of 3.5 million, only 10% survived. Please take some time to go back and answer your final set of questions on the concentration camps. Submit them when you are finished. If you have any questions about today's assignment, please don't hesitate to email me.